It feels like David O. Russell took a look at the information available about the actual story, poured all of his ideas into the screenplay as in to fill the gaps, but then forgot to tie all of them together as story threads. Welcome back to my channel, movie fans. Today we are discussing David O. Russell's Amsterdam, a film starring an endless list of acting superstars and set in the 1930s, where we follow the story of three best friends, a doctor, a nurse, and an attorney, who witness a murder, become suspects themselves, and uncover one of the most outrageous plots in the history of America. And this is one of those films that is based on a supposed true story where a ton of key information is missing. So it essentially gives carte blanche to any storyteller to be as creative as they want in tying loose threads together. You have an incomplete puzzle, and it's up to David O. Russell to put it all together in an engaging, fun, crafty, and quirky way, and he certainly has the quirkiness going for him. In a film where you have Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, John David Washington, Michael Shannon, Mike Myers, Timothy Olyphant, Anya Taylor-Joy, Rami Malek, Robert De Niro, among others, it's extremely hard to balance so much talent and to have each and every one of these characters feel distinctive. But you remember each and every one of these characters' quirks, the way it brings them all to one another, the way it puts all of these pieces together, and the interactions that feel so different, whether we were talking about the three best friends in Christian Bale, John David Washington, and Margot Robbie, when they're interacting between one another, when they're interacting with Anya Taylor-Joy and Rami Malek, when they're interacting with Robert De Niro, when they're interacting with Michael Shannon and Mike Myers, who have one of the most incredible rapports on screen I have seen. I just love the energy of these two together. It's not an easy task, but all of these characters feel extremely distinct from one another, and I also love how the film just transports you back to the time. The film looks like it's from the 30s, the feel of it, the music, the color palette, it's all very immersive. But while this is a film where a ton of pieces in the real story are missing, that's how it comes across. It is very much an incomplete film, or at least it feels like it, because the story feels incomplete, because it so loosely ties everything together. You want to have a funny, quirky mystery that brings all these interesting personalities together to clash, but the film doesn't have that. This is entirely carried by the charisma and charm of the cast. You have Christian Bale, who's honestly the best defined character of the bunch, and you have Margot Robbie and John David Washington, who play his best friends, and the story that kicks off the narrative as they go back and introduce how they met during the war in France and were brought together to Amsterdam. Yes, that's the title of the movie, and it represents the city itself. That was a funny enough starting point, but from there, how the film unfolds, it's just jumbled and feels utterly random. You have a mystery at the center of the story, supposedly tying it all together, but it never feels like our characters are discovering things from themselves. Every step that they take in the unraveling of this mystery feels like they stop, talk to one character who gives them a certain piece of information to meet another character, and eventually that other character tells them a key new reveal, and so they move on, stumbling upon several other characters that essentially discover this mystery for themselves. Our characters are basically just POV personalities for us, the audience, and so the mystery never feels like it unfolds in a satisfying manner. There's no gratification throughout this film when it comes to the mystery. It is so preoccupied with a ton of other things, whether you're talking about Christian Bale's character who's struggling with this complicated marriage and is kind of feeling the hots for his nurse friend who is played by Zoe Saldana. His wife is played by Andrea Riseborough. See, other two big names in this film. And then you have John David Washington and Margot Robbie, who struggle to come back together because they have this past romance, and I am so sorry to say this, but I love these two as actors, and they share absolutely no romantic chemistry whatsoever. The mystery is always being mentioned and our characters are clearly caught up in the middle of it, but it feels like everyone else solves this mystery but them. It's kind of unintentionally hilarious in that way. And because it's the plot pulling these characters in several different directions rather than the characters themselves driving the narrative forward, it unfolds in such convoluted, messy ways where every bit of information about this mystery, every bit of characterizations when it comes to defining the characters, it is all conveyed through long-winded, drawn-out, overbearing moments of dialogue, to the point where the dialogue stops feeling quirky and snappy and witty, much like the Coen brothers style dialogue feels, and that's exactly what this film is trying to emulate, and it more feels like they had no idea how to resolve things. Scenes in this film that have characters talking to one another will reach their goal, they will accomplish what they set out to do, the key pieces of information have been conveyed, and then these conversations continue and roll on for so long with no necessity for it. It feels self-indulgent and it feels like they didn't trim out any of the tentative pieces of dialogue that should not have made it to a final draft. And I was left scratching my head and realized why this film is unnecessarily 2 hours and 20 minutes long, or 15 minutes, something like that. It's overly long as a point. And for a film that illustrates so many quirky personalities bouncing off of one another, because all of them come from this heightened reality, they kind of cancel each other off. The quirkiness, the specialness of each of them, what makes them stand out, eventually wears off rather thin. And so the only person that stands out who's playing it straight-faced is Robert De Niro, who is playing basically himself, but he does it so well that amongst the rest of the characters in this film, he is the absolute show stealer. The one consistent element in this film is the tone. It always wants to come from this heightened reality with all these quirky characters that are completely out of this world, but it's just really not that funny when it wants to be. The humor just doesn't really land because the lines are so overwritten for these characters, and because all of the characterizations come from dialogue, like we talked about, you just don't feel anything. You feel like you learn nothing about these characters from just watching them, how they interact with one another and with the people around them, how they engage themselves in this mystery, because it doesn't feel like they're engaged in this mystery. But then at certain points, it tries to be all heartfelt and compelling, and that also doesn't land, apart from the performances that are believable and these characters pull off expounding these overly written lines really well, but they're still rather overly written. So the whole thing just feels like it's not thought through enough and yet overly thought about. It feels like David O. Russell took a look at the information available about the actual story, poured all of his ideas into the screenplay as in to fill the gaps, but then forgot to tie all of them together as story threads. And so the film goes in all these different directions that just feel entirely messy, like it wasn't thought through whatsoever. He wants to emulate a quirky, distinct Coen brothers movie so badly, he forgot what actually makes those movies work. It's a well thought out story with a mystery that ties all the characters together, and our leads always unfold this mystery, and even the interactions are always between a heightened reality character with quirky traits and someone playing it straight face. So the personalities actually clash and don't feel like they're the same. And so I was utterly devastated by what he delivered with Amsterdam. It doesn't feel so much like it's a tale about three friends, but three friends are caught up in several different tales about several different people that then converge in the most obvious plot resolution possible. The villains are obvious. We've seen this done a million times before. And what starts as very distinct eventually becomes this very small story that isn't distinct from a plethora of other movies that are honestly better told stories. By now, you can tell I wasn't too fond of this one, but before we dive into my final thoughts on Amsterdam, I need you to start the conversation about it in the comments below, and I hope it works for you, so let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below. What are your favorite David O. Russell movies? And if you're enjoying this review for Amsterdam, or if you just love movies and TV, this is the place to be, so consider clicking that subscribe button and you won't miss any future conversations on your favorite movies and TV. Amsterdam really doesn't work. It's a puzzle forcibly compensating for missing pieces. Hectic yet undercooked ideas result in a wholly convoluted and miserably unengaging mystery with contrived humor. An embarrassingly misguided Coen's ripoff without any of the distinct energy or style. I'm giving Amsterdam a D. Big letdown with this one for me, but what do you make of Amsterdam? Anything and everything down there in the comments. LFF is about to start, so stay tuned for my LFF coverage right up here, and thank you so much for watching. Thanks to my channel members for always supporting the channel, and until the next one, love each other and love the movies.